Welcome to this webinar on creating and structuring arguments and counter-arguments. This video is great for understanding what an academic argument and its place in research is, understanding techniques used in forming an argument, and those wanting to know how to structure arguments and counter-arguments for the likes of their research project, dissertation, or for using in essays. So, you want to know how to create and structure arguments and counter-arguments. In this video, we'll cover what is an argument and how is it used in research, key features of an academic argument, differences between arguments and opinions, techniques for forming an argument, why structuring an argument is important, how to structure an argument, and how to use counter-arguments effectively. What is an argument and what is its role in research? When we are talking about arguments in an academic sense, we are talking about good academic writing to persuade someone of your findings or opinion. This is relevant to all subjects. Nearly all academic or research writing makes an argument. That's because its purpose is to create and share knowledge so it can be debated in order to confirm, debate, or improve it. Your research project should do the same, make an argument, just like an academic or professor's writing in journals, books, and online does. You may not have realised that the writing you're doing in your research project is similar to what a lot of academics do. Of course, you may be a beginner at constructing arguments in writing, while the likes of academic professors have been doing it for a while. Your audience may be different and smaller than an academic or professor's, but you will still have an audience, be that a teacher or a supervisor. As you complete your research project, you too are entering the academic conversation. Making an argument means trying to convince others that you are correct as you describe a thing, situation, relationship, or action. Realising that your final product for your research project is to make an argument gives you a big head start because it'll help you know that the sources you're going to need are those that will let you write a good argument for your reader. So, arguing aside versus having an opinion, what is the difference between the two? An opinion is a point of view, which may be formed without sufficient evidence to support it. Opinions tend to reflect an individual's instinctive reaction and will often be based on personal experience. An argument, however, involves arriving at a judgment, which is based on an evaluation of relevant ideas and evidence using reasoning to come to a conclusion. Of course, you may have an opinion that you want to be included in your research project writing, but this should be done in a certain way. Any claims you make should be supported by evidence and backed up, ideally turning them from an opinion into a fully formed argument. What are the key features of an academic argument? How are they different to non-academic arguments? Academic arguments will use each paragraph to develop one point or idea that supports their main argument, use well-selected evidence, data, and examples, explain why this debate, issue, or topic matters, show the other side of the argument, set out ideas clearly, synthesize, in other words, pull together other people's ideas and views, reference other people's ideas, write in a simple and clear style, defining key terms, and explain how their ideas, data, and conclusions fit with those of other academics. So, what techniques will you use when constructing an argument in your dissertation? You may have heard a lot of these words used before when learning about how to write or approach your written dissertation or when thinking about coming up with an argument as part of your research project. Some of them may seem simple. We'll go through each of the techniques as they're all different. Analyze. This is about examining something methodologically and methodically in detail, often in order to explain it. Evaluate. This is assessing or determining the value or merit of something. Compare. This is the act of noting the similarity or dissimilarity between things. Define. This is describing the meaning, scope, or nature of something. Investigate. This is a systematic inquiry to discover and examine the facts. Discuss. This is talking about a topic, point or idea in detail, and then assert. This is about stating a belief or fact confidently. You may have used these techniques perhaps without even considering their exact definition before. The key point here is that these are all useful skills and you will be using one or more of these techniques when you're constructing arguments in your essay or dissertation. It's good to be aware of the differences. For example, if you're working on developing the argument that there is no one strong method scientifically proven to help manage misbehaviour in young children, you might define misbehaviour here, which is the action or naughtiness and disorderly conduct of children. This is different to investigating, in other words, doing a systematic inquiry to find out about the different methods involved in managing misbehaviour. This is different again to evaluating the methods of behaviour management themselves, in other words, to determine the value or merit of the methods in order to come to your conclusions. You might compare different methods for behaviour management before finally asserting, in other words, stating with confidence that there is indeed no one good method for managing misbehaviour in young children. In particular, you'll be analysing the arguments of others and analysing sources to construct your own arguments and evaluating sources and evidence to back up the claims that you make. Before we move on to show you in more detail how an argument is structured, here we'll talk about why structuring an argument is important. Reasons for structuring an argument include: 1. Having structure enables you to give a clear explanation for each argued point. It makes your writing make sense. 2. Structuring your argument takes your reader on a journey. It guides them through a reasoning process. Signposting clearly will make your arguments easier to understand too. 3. Having structure demonstrates your ability and credibility in academic writing to your teacher or supervisor. At the heart of all arguments is a claim or key point, the main idea or point that you are interested in proving or supporting. Establishing your claim is one of the most important parts of any piece of academic work, be it an essay, a dissertation research project like the extended project qualification, or any academic paper. A good claim should be bold, exciting, and most importantly, worth arguing over. A version of your claim will probably be included somewhere in your dissertation research project introduction. To convince your reader of your claim, you will need to provide some proof. Your proof will be in the form of evidence, data, sources, and examples, all of which will need to be fully referenced in the appropriate style. You can see our video on referencing and writing a bibliography for more tips on referencing. However, it is important to recognise that the relevant evidence does not automatically prove a claim. There is usually some work to be done to convince your reader that there is a connection between the claim or point and the proof. In other words, how and why does this evidence inform your thinking? This is part of the argument and is sometimes called an explanation or evaluation. It is also important to consider and actively seek out alternative points of view and potential objections, which are called counter-arguments. We sometimes tend to draw on or use ideas and sources that support only our own ways of thinking, which can mean narrow or flawed arguments. By engaging deliberately with counter-arguments and building them into our own thinking, we can develop more nuanced and rounded arguments. Your argument's conclusion will draw on this process of research and evaluation to present a balanced summary of the argument using language that is appropriate and avoids bias. A bit more on what the structure of an argument looks like within the space of a paragraph that you might be writing. You have just seen the basic structure and principles of an argument. Another way to approach this is to use the Peel method. The Peel method was introduced during video 4, strengthening your approach to essay writing. We'll explore each of these elements of structuring an argument in some more detail. You might already be aware of the Peel method for structuring your dissertation or essay overall. This stands for point, evidence, explain, link. Point. Clearly and definitively state your argument. This is also known as claim, which is what you're looking to prove. Evidence and examples, providing support for your point by giving an example or citing from sources that you have found. Explain. Explain your point and elaborate on how your evidence supports your point. Then link. Link your argument to the main title of your research project or research question. You also provide a link to the next paragraph. Partway through the paragraph, before summarising your point, you can introduce counter-arguments too. We'll explore counter-arguments and their purpose in more detail later in the video. One point to note is that there are different approaches and ways you can go about structuring an argument. We have used the Peel method, but your teacher or researcher, project supervisor, might suggest a different approach. So, what does it look like practically to structure an argument within your work? The argument mainly happens in the discussion section of a dissertation research project, the likes of the extended project qualification, or within the main body of an essay you're writing. We would expect the literature review to come before the discussion section and be separate. You can see video 4 in this series on strengthening your approach to essay writing to hear more about the overall structure of a dissertation research project or essay. But for now, structuring your arguments in a dissertation or essay will need to be broken down into individual paragraphs. Each paragraph that you write should have its own key point or claim. This is the P, the point, part of the Peel method. Every paragraph makes just one point, which is key to making Peel work. Taken together, the points made in your essay should combine to provide a relevant response to the chosen research question or essay question. You can only write a persuasive dissertation or essay if you identify a relevant point and develop it fully. In the introduction part of your argument, your aim is to familiarise your reader with your key point, get your reader interested in your point, set up your paragraph to discuss your key point. This key point or claim is not a factual statement. It's a claim that you're trying to prove in your paragraph. Here is an example of a research project question or essay title. Is there racial bias within the UK police force? There are many points that you could discuss in relation to this question. For example, discussing whether there is racial bias with respect to police interaction with the public, or with respect to racial bias with police making arrests. Another point that could be made is in relation to racial bias in police recruitment and promotion internally. We will use this example. Therefore, a key point for your paragraph and constructing your argument could be: the UK police force has been accused of racism with respect to its hiring practices and promotion structure. Next, the first E of Peel, evidence and examples. Within the main body of your paragraph, after your key point or claim, you will need to show support of your claim with evidence and examples to back it up. Your aim is to build your argument. It entails using research findings, such as empirical findings, statistics, facts, and quotes from credible scholarly sources or primary texts. If you're doing an extended project qualification, ensure that you use either in-text citations or footnotes for the books, journals, websites, newspapers, and other secondary sources that you use. You can see another video in the series, Literature Review and Finding Trustworthy Sources, to learn more about what a credible source is. So here, again, we address the research question, is there racial bias within the UK police force? And use the key point, the UK police force has been accused of racism with respect to its hiring practices and promotion structure. Below is a list of evidence and examples that could be used to support this key point. Have a read of these. You'll note that specific examples are given in relation to BAME groups within the police force. Statistics are used to justify the points made. For example, ethnic minority police officers make up only 10% of the London Metropolitan Police Force. This is by Ahmed 2018, whilst over 40% of London's population are from Black, Asian and minority ethnic BAME groups. A range of other examples are used to support the point. For example, talking about the average number of months for BAME individuals to progress to a higher position. Another example is given that assesses the geographic context of the points being made, helping the reader to understand the broad applicability and importance of the examples. For example, saying these disparities occur across the country. The next stage in constructing an argument using the Peel method is to explain and evaluate ideas, the second E. This is to ensure that you knit together your paragraph nicely by explaining the points you have highlighted in the main argument and the supporting evidence. Here, you will deploy some of the analytical language and terms that we used earlier. You can compare and contrast, relate or counter ideas based on your evidence. You will just have gathered the evidence and examples, the same as the previous slide, as you can see here. Below this is an example of how you might explain and evaluate these ideas. So here, for example, this would suggest that there is racial bias in the UK police force's promotion and hiring approaches. It might also be inferred that the police force is therefore a profession that is less attractive for young people from a BAME background. Furthermore, evidence about the disparities might suggest that it could be a hostile workplace for ethnic minorities once they get in. With this paragraph, note how it uses linking language such as "this would suggest" and "therefore." The next step, after presenting your key point, evidence and explanation, is your counter-argument or objection to the original argument used. Why do we use counter-arguments? Whilst you may feel that acknowledging views opposing yours will weaken your argument, the opposite is in fact true. Your essay will look stronger if you can show that you have come to the conclusions that you have chosen despite considering objections to your opinion. If you can write about objections and explain why these are wrong, again giving evidence, then it shows that your argument is robust and will also give the reader greater faith in your writing, as they will feel your essay or dissertation is giving them an unbiased, rounded view. In fact, during the process of considering counter-arguments, you might come to modify your own position so that it is more defensible, based on the balance of evidence. This is absolutely fine to do and does, in fact, show that you are thinking critically about your arguments. To summarise, the main reasons we use counter-arguments include addressing the claims of opposing points, which is an important part of building an argument, demonstrating your ability to consider multiple different points of view, and showing your credibility as a writer about your topic. It shows that you have researched multiple sides of the argument and come to an informed decision about what you are arguing, having considered all the arguments. The easiest way to use a counter-argument is to offer this after making a series of main points to do with your argument or main claim, as per the structure we have just looked at. You could do this via a few sentences towards the end of a paragraph you have written in relation to your main argument, or within an additional and separate paragraph if you feel it's justified. You should give sufficient space to your counter-argument, explaining why it is in opposition to your main argument, and even showing you understand why the author might have had that point of view. When writing a counter-argument, it is worth noting that you should consider your audience when offering a counter-argument. You should demonstrate respect and understanding of other points of view. You should show that you acknowledge these. And using depreciating language about another point of view or opinion might cause your audience to reject your own position or point without carefully considering your claims. Here is a key point that we were discussing again. And here is an example of a counter-argument to the key point or claim that we have just been discussing. So the key point is the UK police force has been accused of racism with respect to its hiring practices and promotion structure. An example counter-argument might be, on the other hand, the Metropolitan Police's 2017 to 2021 diversity and inclusion strategy stated that 13% of officers are from a BAME background, and we are recruiting at a rate that is far in excess of that. This might suggest an anti-racist attitude within the UK police force recruitment. Lastly, after introducing your main point, key examples and explanation, and finally some counter-arguments, you'll be ready to wrap up your paragraph, linking back and showing relevancy of the argument that you have just constructed. This is the L, link, in the Peel method. The link should be in response to the counter-argument. In other words, having put the counter-argument, you answer it, showing why your original claim still stands or can be adjusted so that it is not vulnerable to the counter-argument. So in relation to the argument that we have just been constructing, the first part of the link could be, however, the statistics showing the proportional number of BAME individuals within the police workforce, as well as the slower average time for BAME individuals compared to their white counterparts to gain promotion between ranks, suggest that prejudice still exists. This sentence counters the point that was given in the counter-argument, demonstrating the strength of the original argument. The last part of the link could be, therefore, there is evidence to indicate that some racial bias within the organisation in terms of human resources practices exists. This sentence links to the overall research question and comes back to the main point about bias in recruitment practices. Remember, overall, you should avoid using and raising new claims in your link and conclusion sentence. Here we show you what all the Peel points that we have just discussed look like when they come together in a paragraph. The point, the evidence and examples, explanation and evaluation, the counter-argument, and the link. You'll also see that at the beginning of the paragraph, there is a link to the previous paragraph by saying, in addition to the incidents in interaction with the public. Take a moment to have a look at this paragraph put together. Here is the same paragraph again that we have just looked at. What further signs are there that this makes a good academic argument? First of all, the author aims to present their point of view in an unbiased way up front. The author does this through the use of language such as, the police force has been accused of, which demonstrates that this is a point of view as opposed to an absolute fact. The author uses statistics and solid evidence to back up their claim from reputable sources. Then the author also uses appropriate referencing throughout, for example, Ahmed 2018 and Dodgson 2017. This is good citing practice. You can see another video in this series on referencing and writing a bibliography for more on this. And you can see that the author uses language which makes logical links between sections in the paragraph. For example, this suggests, and it may also indicate. Lastly, you'll notice that the author has not used language like I believe or I think. That sort of language is subjective, not objective. Now we'll recap on a few useful sentence starters and phrases that are helpful signposts in each section of your paragraph as part of constructing a Peel argument. You have seen a couple of these in the paragraph that we've just examined. These are great for extended paragraphs and guiding your reader through your argument. When making your main point or claim, sentence starters to introduce this are useful, such as, it can be argued that, it is evident that, a point to consider is, first of all, or it appears that, this explores that. When giving examples to support your point, the E of Peel, you can introduce your evidence and examples in different ways, such as, for example, or for instance. This is shown in the following quote. The statistics from X sources show. The author states, including the names of the author and the date, and it is clear from X named research that. Then the next E, when you explain your point, you can use words that show you are clearly evaluating the evidence that has been given. For example, this suggests, these facts show, it can be argued that, this information points to, and the result of this is. Finally, the L. When linking back to your research question and topic, you can use summative or linking statements such as, therefore we see that, thus in order to, from this we can conclude, it is clear that, ultimately. Overall, there are many signposting words and phrases that you can use when constructing an argument in your paragraph. Have a think about what others are useful under these sections. This list is by no means exhaustive, so we recommend doing a search for more of them too. Finally, here are some common pitfalls that you might come across when constructing an argument. We recommend that you avoid using 1 or 2 sentence paragraphs without sufficient development, page-long paragraphs with no breaks, Don't use paragraphs that cover several different topics. Remember that each paragraph should have one key point or claim. Paragraphs with evidence, but no clear relationship between the evidence. Then also avoid paragraphs that don't link one to the next. You should make sure that paragraphs have a nice flow between them. Lastly, make sure not to use language which has assumptions about your reader or assumptions about popular opinion. Sentences that begin, "It is accepted that," or "We all know that," or "No one would argue that," may actually antagonise someone marking your essay. Finally, to help you avoid some of these pitfalls, do remember that subheadings can be used throughout your writing to help organise and structure the argument. So, a recap and final tips for creating an argument. Use the Peel method to structure your argument. Remember, this is not the only method out there, but you can use it as a framework. Your point should be a clear introduction to the argument you are making in this. And your example or evidence should be strong and relevant. Ask yourself, have you chosen the best examples? Your explanation should demonstrate why your evidence is important and how it conveys meaning. And your link should summarise the point you've just made and link back to the broader essay argument or topic. Secondly, remember to use counter-arguments when making arguments too. As discussed, acknowledging alternative opinions and points of view will strengthen your writing. Lastly, follow our tips for what makes a good academic argument. The use of referencing, subject-specific vocabulary, good linking words, and phrases and language that avoid bias. These are all important. Remember, the Peel method can be used as a framework, not a cage. The main aim is to communicate clearly, so use this framework to help you do so. As you gain confidence, you can start to move away from using it strictly. Finally, what to do next? First, choose your research question. See the first video in this series on the what, why, and how of research questions, getting started to do so. Next, once you have your research question, you'll be in a position to practice using the Peel method to structure an argument. Your arguments will appear within the discussion section of a dissertation research project like the EPQ and following the literature review section. Use a key point or claim in relation to a question and practice constructing an argument with it using evidence, examples, and explanations. Make sure to account for counter-arguments too. Lastly, speak to your teacher or supervisor about further resources. You can see another video in this series on how to strengthen your approach to essay or dissertation writing to find out about the overall structure of a dissertation research project and the individual sections within these. Thanks for listening.